Hello, it's Piccia Neri here, and we are at the Design for Conversions conference. And with me today is Billy Carlson from our wonderful sponsor, Balsamiq. Hello, Billy. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Very, very happy to have you. Now, as I've said various times already, I like to have sponsors that I use and that I believe in and that are aligned with the sort of general vision of the conference and of everything else that I do. And Balsamiq, I have to say, is just extraordinary how we coincide in everything. So it's truly wonderful to have you here. And this conversation, I think, is going to be, well, we know it's going to be mostly on how wireframes help, but it's also going to be in general how the design process helps, isn't it? Because that's what we've established that we're about.
Yes. It's one of my favorite subjects, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Absolutely. And one thing that I'm quite big on, that the more times goes by, the more convinced I am that everything starts from there, is the content first. How shall I call it? The content first it's not an ideology, but it's definitely a principle.
Yeah, I call it a mentality.
It's a
it's
mentality.
A way of approaching your projects. So I will dig in a bit. I could tell you, a lot of people I feel like haven't heard of this term, maybe outside of our profession of design or building products, but content first design is actually quite simple, where you try to determine the content that you will need for your product before you start actually designing and building your product. So you can take the everything you already know about what you want to achieve, and then just put it into even like a Google Doc. So like content first design is meant to be quite simple. It actually is a way to approach everything from building a brand new product to even fixing an existing one. So I always like to mention that because I feel like a lot of the projects we work on we already have something. We know we need to redo it or we need to make it better. And there's a lot of tools that you can use in the design realm to not just like try to update it for whatever you think, but you can take an actual processed approach to it. And so I'm going to focus my energy on that sort of example. And also on our website, there's an article from a content designer named Emily Barnes from Capital One who kind of walks through this process. So let's just, paint a picture. You have a marketing website for your company and you want to redo it. So that means you already have tons of content there. So what you can do is you can just take all of it and say, here's the homepage content, and put it on a Google Doc or a Word doc. It doesn't matter. And the purpose of that is to get it away from all of the visuals and all of the branding and anything, and just have the words there. And then what you want to do after that is, read it and see if it still resonates, and make edits and understand what you're communicating to your audience and to your customers first. It's like, this is already what we're wanting to do. There's a reason why you wanted to redo everything. So then that's the next lens you take. Like, I understand what we're communicating now more fully if I just read it plain text. And then you say, okay, well, I want to introduce these new topics, or I want us to have more of this type of tone. And then you can basically take that doc and rewrite it and say, okay, this is what I'm looking for in terms of how we're expressing what we do with language, with our words. Then you could take that doc and now you're ready to lay it out in a design. So this is where you can use, simple sketching. You know what content needs to go on there. So you can sketch out, here's where the headline will go. You can use Balsamiq to do the same thing. It's very quick. But that's where you start to take it from the content and then start blocking it out into a design and then just build it up from there. But if you just start with almost high fidelity tools, like, I want to redesign this. I want to redesign this, so I'm going to make this blue instead of purple. I'm going to make this, this. You're not focusing on what you're communicating to your audience. You're focused on the aesthetics. So if you try to take it all out, focus on the content, and then put it back in, the content that you're delivering will be far better than it would the other way.
Absolutely. Also because content first is the content first mentality means that when you know what your content is going to be, you probably will be able to get started designing even when you don't actually have the final content. Because I know that that's such a common problem with clients that don't deliver the content when you need it. But what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's such a great point. Something I gloss over because that is like the most common issue that we would come across is it's due in a week and we haven't gotten the content yet. So this also should help because in content first design, instead of you leaving it to someone else, you know, you have a writer, you have the content producers, and they're really busy. You can focus all your energy with them and say, like, we're here to help you facilitate the content creation. I know, what can we do? Or another example I've taken where if it's content first and they're not prepared and you can't really break that wall, you can say like, all right, well, here's the wireframe. This is how much space I'm allotting you. That might actually help facilitate their job because like, all right, you only have space for 300 words here. The headline has to be 30 characters or less. This is the template we're going to follow. That is another content first mentality where you're not actually producing content, but you're dictating the spaces allotted to content. And then they know up front, there are some battles sometimes where you do that and they want to add more and be like, you know, I'm not redesigning this entire thing because you went over a paragraph. So you have leverage there. So there's a lot of different ways to attack it. Another good thing I wanted to mention really quick about content first design is there's a lot more than just words to content. There's imagery and photographs. And sometimes those are usually forgotten towards the higher fidelity polished ending. And if you focus on that early and you try to understand everything you might need to make this experience work, you'll have a much better time during crunch time when you're trying to build it and put all those assets in. You can almost have almost everything ready to go, and they'll save you from those crazy fires at the end of a project.
So you said one thing that I want to take out here and make sure that we highlight it in fluorescent ink. That's a fantastic way to use wireframes. Use wireframes to give limits for content. You can show your client that that's the allocated space they have for that headline or that paragraph. And that's going to help them out, actually. It's going to give them a frame of reference, and also it's going to make sure they don't go over it. So that's a part of the content first mentality that we were talking about. And also I find that when you get to the detail, because to me, the styling really is the detail. It's not, but at the same time, it mixes with the content when the styling expresses the strategy. And what I mean by that is that, you know, you probably are not going to use certain types of aesthetics when you know your audience. So we're back to knowing your audience, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. So branding does play a big role in your design. In my opinion, I think a lot of people think of designers as just that ending point of putting the polish and visually expressing your brand and how you're communicating it. But that's actually almost the easier part because typically you have an established brand and established patterns, and you just try to follow those and layer those on top in a thoughtful way to a really solid foundation of an experience, which is all of that other stuff before.
Absolutely. So again, that's what content first means, and that's what design means. And they are not afterthoughts. They come at the beginning and they inform your whole strategy and the whole way that you put the project together. So this is a way where I feel that wireframes play a really big role. And because I think that's something that we don't actually say enough, but back to the basics of the reasons why you use wireframes, which is there's nothing else to think about when you see a wireframe.
Exactly. We have a lot of different terms that we use at Balsamiq that how we explain wireframes. We actually created something called the 10 Principles of Effective User Interface Wireframes. And a lot of it
sounds very interesting.
I will share that with you. It is really nice, but one of them is that wireframes are designed to be criticized. So they're designed for feedback. They're conversation starters. Because they don't look like they're an actual product, they look like sketches of an idea. Our brains feel like, oh, like I have a thought on this too. And we feel less closed off than if it were something very high fidelity, high polished, and look more intimidating. They're designed to be unintimidating and to like welcome in feedback, communicate ideas, and then welcome more ideas, essentially.
Absolutely. And I think that to do that, they are much better than even a minimal viable website would be, because you're already distracted by a million things and by function as well. And I think that function actually comes a bit later in the process when you start with content, which I think is very interesting. So one thing that fascinates me as well is that when you think of wireframes, there's something super simple, they're the simplest thing. And yet, because they are the starting point of a whole process, and that process is user-centered design, or better said, we had that conversation earlier a little bit in the podcast episode, it's human-centered design. So what is human-centered design to you, and why is it important for a tool like Balsamiq to start from human-centered design?
Yeah, I think I would say that human-centered design is, we really put the humans, the people who are either consuming the information, using the application, trying to achieve some goal, we put them at the center of our thinking, of how we approach a problem, how we design a solution. Basically, really simply put, we want to focus our attention on the end user, whoever's, again, using the product. So I think in terms of the evolution of our product, I think we have we were using human-centered design because we didn't want to evolve our product just to meet sort of the standards that were changing in the design tools category, like software for designers, because that's when we first started, there was a lot of designers using it, but also a lot of developers and a lot of product owners, and anyone, again, creating digital products who don't have the title design, don't have the design in their title. So I think one of the ways that we were really pushing this human-centered design process is we just knew who our customers were by talking with them and interacting with them and understanding what they need. And what we realized is what they needed is for us not to change that much. The core focus, their core users, it worked well. We didn't have to chase what was the new fad in these higher fidelity tools to keep the attention of a different segment when we already had a great segment. So just understanding our customers and who they were and how they needed to use the product helped. And we're still here. Design tools, sometimes independent design tools maybe don't last forever. And, we've been around for 10 years, and it's just the work of, I'm new. So it's been a work of a great team who understands and have always put customers first,
Yeah, and that's basically also the principle behind the best marketing and the best branding, as we were saying, and the best business as well, because all the business gurus, or what they teach is to make sure that you understand your audience so you can actually solve their problem and give them what they need. But we won't go down that rabbit hole right now, because we did that before. So there's something else that we touched on earlier that came up because we were looking at the Balsamiq Academy, which, as said before, is really a great tool to use. So what do you mean when you say treat coding like design? Because I know a lot of our audience are actually probably coders rather than designers. So I'm really intrigued by this. How do you treat coding like design?
Yeah,
What does that mean?
I love this. So I, as a part of our Balsamiq Wireframing Academy, I do interviews with various product creators. So not all of them are designers. And I did an interview with a gentleman who created this great job board application, who actually studied graphic design, but also studied computer science. And he's he's an engineer. He's not a designer, but he has the designer mentality. So he approached essentially development as a human-centered design process where there are iterations. You're not just, you're always learning from the previous iteration, and you're labeling it that. I think what's interesting about the difference between design and code is not that much. I mean, writing code is actually a really creative exercise. You're solving a problem. And I think the mentalities that he brought to it are speaking with people and sharing their code to understand how they would approach the problem to help him approach his problem better. Reviewing other people's code in an empathetic way, understanding where they're coming from. And I always think of user-centered design as putting yourself in someone else's shoes, but always being willing to keep learning. And I think that's opening yourself up to learn from others. And I think that's what he really meant by treating code like design. And making it a collaborative experience instead of just a solo, I'm writing this code for myself. And what's interesting is, again, I think a lot of developers do this. There's GitHub and people post their open source code everywhere. But I think they don't realize how similar that is to the design process, where you want to share and understand and get feedback and then make it better. So that continuous improvement is a big part of it too.
I completely agree. And I think this actually brings up to the surface something else that has come up for me in the years since I've started talking about design to non-designers and to developers as well. That is to say that, again, there isn't that much of a difference, or there shouldn't be, because in a way, developers are designing. They are following a process by means of which they solve a problem. I don't know what is design if it isn't that, and they need to plan, because to me, design is the biggest part of design is the planning, and that's what they're doing. They are planning. So, and I think what they liked about me talking to them was that it was a designer who wasn't being condescending and wasn't saying that they, was not being a design snob. It was saying, I was saying, look, this is how it works, and this is the reason why you should do this instead of doing that. And that seems to be really, really helpful. And that, again, it's something I'm so pleased that it has come up, because it's something that over and over again, I keep saying it over and over again, comes to the surface, which is design is very helpful for everybody, the businessman, the marketing person, and the developer, which is what we're talking about now. And actually, I would also go as far as saying that a tool such as wireframing is very useful also to a marketer who's building a user flow, because they're building a sales funnel.
Yeah.
How do you do that without wireframes? I don't know how you would do that. So I guess that we could say not just treat coding like design, but also treat marketing like design.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's so true. And that all of it is to make experiences better for your end user, but it also has like a dual purpose, because it does help make your experience building and creating whatever you're doing, hopefully easier and more enjoyable if you're thinking ahead of some things. Like instead of just jumping right into code and start creating your product, what if you just sat back for a while? And a lot of developers do this and like whiteboard out what you're trying to make and think of different ways it can work, and maybe ask two people like, hey, does this make sense to you? Like if you wanted to sign up for this new product and the product did this, like look at my whiteboard sketches or look at my wireframes in Balsamiq. Like, does this make sense? Okay, good. I heard some feedback and maybe this part's confusing. I can rethink that, but I'm on the right track and I can get going. And it's a really simple step to take that is often skipped because it doesn't seem worth it maybe, but it really is.
Honestly, if I am facing a new project of any kind, I can really, I cannot get anywhere unless I I visualize the flow somehow, how it goes. You can whiteboard it, you can use a tool like Balsamiq, you can use pen and paper, but it's so hard otherwise. And I don't know how you get other people to understand it if you don't do that. I just don't know.
That's the thing. Like, I think of wireframing as sketching. Like, I think the lowest form of wireframing is just drawing out sketches. And I still think those are wireframes. Some designers disagree with me and they think that's just sketching. But if you're visualizing an interface in any way, that's a wireframe because it's wiry and it's black and white, right? And it's a wireframe. It's not a design yet. It's a wireframe, or maybe it is a design, but it's very minimal and it can change very quickly. So I always just want to encourage anyone who's creating something new just to start with sketches in any way, whatever way works best for you. Visualize it without using digital tools, or very minimal digital tools, not meant to create the big final product, but to just visualize it in your head. Then go from there, because sometimes even if you see it real, you create a wireframe, you're like, that's not what I want though. Maybe you have to express it outwardly to really then understand what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. And I think this loops back into the content thing that so many web builders say, I can't get the content out of my client. I guarantee that if you give your client a wireframe, they're going to find it much, much easier. Also, I think that if you start from the design process, you wouldn't probably have that problem because you would already have talked to your clients so much that the content sort of creates itself. And that's a slight digression into what you were saying earlier, but it's a way in which wireframes help so much, and it's not often
I've done it
thought
even,
of. So.
I mean, in corporate settings, when there's a lot of silos where there's a writing group, that doesn't work with you, they work with 30 other groups. And so like I had a thing where we just created templates. Like, this is based on the wireframe. Here's a Word doc with, text examples that could fit in our design. So fill these in and send them back to us. That can be how you facilitate. Like, I feel like a lot of what we do in the design is we try to facilitate all the different aspects of building the product. So we want to talk to the users to understand what they actually need, but we also want to talk to the product owners to see what the business is needing from it. We want to talk to all the other people creating it, the writers, the developers. And we're sort of we've again shifted from being a singular visual focus to trying to help everyone facilitate everything to make it a seamless experience and easy to use.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So one thought that came to my mind listening to you now is, what would you say though, because I know that quite a few people in our audience don't have those big teams, don't have like the writers, they don't have all those people. What would you say to someone that say is, an agency of one or an agency of 2 or 3 max, and is dealing with a client who's not necessarily familiar with the whole process, and they need to extract content out of them, they need to create a website that will work, that will make the sales. What would you recommend? What's the number one recommendation you would give them? And how can wireframing in general help them in this process? Because I think it can, but
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I first want to start off by saying, like, what I previously said about what designers do, I feel like I'm using designers in a way that we're all designers. And that's how it's like a designer mentality of helping other people facilitate everything. So a business owner, a product owner is a designer, and a developer. We're all playing this role of trying to make it better. So with that, building on that, if you have a really unresponsive client, a lot of times maybe you need to do more FaceTime, and instead of asynchronous communication, you're going to have to set up synchronous communication where you can facilitate, again, like, okay, I understand that you're having issues with getting the content ready. Like, what could we do? Should we do a writing workshop together? Again, the designer mentality is to facilitate whatever is needed at that point to push the project forward, to make it a good project, and then use these tools of facilitation to sort of help push that forward. So if I was having issues with maybe a solo client who just not sending me what I need. I'm like, let's set up a Zoom call. We need to get this done. I've set up 6 prompts for us to write about based off of your product or your website. And let's just talk about it. And we'll have a note taker take all the notes so that you have a lot to build off of. And then you do your little facilitation. These things are never difficult. Here's what the problem we're trying to solve. Here's a conversation starter, which I've been taught in design is called a prompt. This is a conversation starter to get us going. If you're doing a branding project, so what is unique? Like, tell me some stories about what's unique about your brand or your history of your company. Those are the most interesting things to put on your website because it's personal to you. Why are your services? Tell me an example of how you achieved success with a customer using, your principles. And then, so they'll tell you what their principles are. Like, well, we really believe in this. So if you're, again, playing the facilitator role, you can really push a lot of this content out of them. And sometimes people just need that because they can't sit down and start writing. Like, I know I can't. I need some sort of help. So again, always having that mentality of like, how can I push this forward? My job is partially a facilitator. And then that should really help a lot. And then you'll have probably have a customer for life because you're really listening and really trying to help them.
Absolutely. And I have, for instance, created so many templates of conversations such as this one, interviews for stakeholders and how to get them going and so on. And it's so true. And that things will come to the surface that they weren't even aware of. And then they go, oh my God, you've pinpointed a problem that I didn't know I have, but I do have it. And as an aside, so funny that you said that in a way everyone is a designer. And I agree with that. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier as well when I was saying that developers, in fact, the process is not that dissimilar. But I know so many designers that would simply throttle us. They would just be like, how dare you say that? And that's the kind of designer that says that design thinking is bullshit and all the rest of it. But I run the risk of digressing there, but I completely agree that it's absolutely true. When you consider design as a facilitating process, as a problem-solving process, then you extend that title to a lot of people. And I know that lots of business owners that I know, they design the pathway to success for their clients. So that's a design process. Yeah.
And they learn
without
from,
doubt.
our customer. We had a few customers who had these issues and we created a new version to help. That's all of design mentality. I think that's a big issue in our design profession where people feel like they need to have the ownership over a specific part of this process. But I don't think that's helpful when you're creating products for other people. Again, like if you're a designer and you're very visual and you're creating advertising campaigns, that's fine. And you're trying to sell a vision. That's different than you're trying to help people do things and to help them, do things better. So you have to have a different mentality that way. And that's not, I know everything and don't ask people for their opinion. Because one thing I wanted to touch on really quick, because this is reminding me of it, is this design by committee. I don't want to say it's a myth. It's not a myth, but it all has to do with how you approach your project. So I've heard a lot of people, and I speak to a lot of designers who say, like, I like, talking about facilitating conversation and inviting feedback, but what happens when people expect their idea to be put into this design? I feel like you're not communicating the purpose of what you're doing then, because your purpose is to serve the end goal, to serve the humans using whatever you're making, not to serve you. So the idea is to generate tons of different perspectives to try to understand maybe what these group of people are needing. So if you're dealing with a lot of design by committee, you just have to orientate the conversation back to what the actual goal is. It's not about us, it's about them. So that's like, I've heard this before, and that's how you solve it. Just like, it's not going to serve the end goal well if we add something extra on. We need to be really careful and considerate about what we include in our projects. And that's just a simple way to help that. To me, it's simple, but I know it's sometimes there's a stakeholder
I know.
Who really they want.
I know, but with this kind of attitude, which again is nothing but empathy, it's possible to even counteract the question, the dreaded, can we make the logo bigger? Which is used as, it's used as the, you know, the sort of it's the meme, it's the epitome that represents everything that we hate about clients. But the thing is that if you're able to tell your clients, I could do that, yet I don't recommend that, because if you make the logo bigger, then your client will be distracted from this button over here, which is where we want them to go. I guarantee that which is where they buy and you make the money, I can guarantee that the client would go, you know what, you're right, let's not make the logo bigger. There is a way, but you need to create the pathway to that point by using a certain process, which is what we're talking about in this conference a lot. So one final question, which is possibly the most obvious, and it's about how can wireframing actually really help developers specifically, or I add, communications with developers, because that's another big growth stoppage, isn't it, for agencies, how to talk to developers in a way that we understand one another and that they're happy and we're happy that, you know, we're doing things properly.
Well, I think wireframing can help a lot. And the reason why is it can almost, there's a few. One is you're visually showing them what you want instead of writing it in a story in Pivotal Tracker or Jira ticket, right? You know, I want the button to be blah, blah, blah. You can visually show a layout. But what I like the most about wireframes, and this is something I've used the most with Balsamiq, a little Balsamiq plug, is we have the ability in our cloud product to have multiple designers designing within one wireframe. So brilliant. I've actually used this with developers where I'm like, here's the layout I've created, you know, take a look at it, leave some notes, and let me know what you think. And then they'll have, one thing I feel like maybe designers, I don't know why, maybe we don't realize is developers have opinions on layout as well. They have opinions on all of the things, not just how it's built, but how it looks too. And so you allow them the opportunity to express themselves in the form of a wireframe, so they don't have to write all the code. Again, they can save the time and show us what they mean. And then this kind of brings it back to the previous question, is if they make a change that you think would disserve the design, you can use it as a moment to have a conversation about why you think it is. This is a good idea, and we can, a lot of times for me, it was, this is how Amazon does it, or, you know, that's fine, and it works for Amazon, but let me explain to you, like, I'll tell you my perspective of why maybe that wouldn't work here. Or, and this has happened as well, they'll have a new idea, and I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Like, why can't we do that? I think we can. And then you can use this really simple visual tool to have much better dialogue and an easier, smoother handoff if it's an open conversation. So, you know, it's visual, so they get it. And they also can participate because it's not a high fidelity design where they have to know how to use Figma or Sketch, you know.
Because also, let's not forget that developers are the ones who possess the knowledge as to whether an idea, a functional idea, is good or not. Because it may be that it has technical restrictions that you as a designer or as a marketer, you're not aware of those possible restrictions that would actually make the experience and therefore the sales, let's not forget the conversions, that's what we're all about, they would actually not be as good. So I think that wireframes play a huge role in this. And if we haven't persuaded yet that you need to use wireframes, I don't know how. But however, in case you need more, head off to the Balsamiq page where there are some demos and where they will chat to you as well. So thank you so much, Billy, for this. It was extremely enlightening, and it's been a real pleasure. But we'll get more of you in the booth area as well for Balsamiq. So now, just one thing to finish. If there was out of all that we said, one thing that people can take away and immediately implement? If you have to say just one, you choose one and that's it. That's the only thing that you want people to go away with and they can immediately start using. What tip? What would that be?
I don't know. I have so many in my head, but the one that's sticking out right now is if you're going to start any new project, or you're doing something new that you have to write code and design for, is start with sketches and start super low fidelity. Even if you think you know what you want to do, don't go right into the high powered tools. Go into the low powered pen and paper, sketch it out, or Balsamiq, or any wireframing tool that you can make your idea in less than 20 seconds or a minute, because that'll help you orientate to the visual, because you have something in your head, get it out of your head and see if you still like it, because you might want to make changes. So that's something that I think applies to any kind of designer, any kind of person making anything, that you're going to have to use something higher fidelity. They'll take longer to make into reality. Start with a sketch to see if you like it.
I couldn't agree more. And especially even if you're someone who doesn't usually do that, start doing it. If you haven't done it so far, I don't care how old you are, start doing it and see the difference that it makes. And actually, this is something else that every single genius that you've heard of does. Carry something with you and put things onto paper whenever you do that. And if you've never done it before in your 95, I don't care, start doing it, and I think that you'll see a difference. Brilliant last tip. I think that was excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been great.
Thank you so much, Billy.
Yes,
thank you so much. And can't wait to speak to you again soon.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks everyone.
Bye.